Hello everyone, and welcome once again to the Blood War Encyclopedia. I am the compiler of the encyclopedia, John Wooka. In this second account, I want to go over some quote-unquote housekeeping. Basically, there are a few considerations that I want to be clear about as I go further into the encyclopedia. There are a lot of sources out there, and they don't always lock together. That means I have to make some choices about what I'm presenting to you. With this account, I want to let you know more about how I make these choices. The goal of the Blood War Encyclopedia is to give people a single resource for finding information about the Blood War, and provide an introduction to the sources for people who want to explore further. The Blood War is an extremely interesting part of the core Dungeons & Dragons / Planescape lore, but especially past the 2nd edition AD&D material, it has remained a really vague notion which is hard to engage with. The kind of campaigns I would like to make possible with this encyclopedia are grand political epics, where players can be mercenaries or other interested parties, performing intrigues and discovering secrets, becoming deeply involved in this multi-planar struggle. I know that, in a lot of cases, D&D games don't go along this route. Most games will end up being a lot jokier and more random. That's fine. As far as fiction, the epic war story is what typically draws me into fantasy, so if nothing else, it's interesting to explore how the Blood War can be used in a similar manner. That said, having the encyclopedia in the back of your head can also provide a way to put the politics of the lower planes in context, even if you plan to just dip your toes in. In contrast to other Blood War publications from this very publisher, the encyclopedia will be proceeding in separate volumes. Each volume is going to have a theme, and the accounts in each volume will be primarily focused on digging up info from sources on specific topics and presenting that info. The goal of the volume accounts will be cataloging the best information about each topic in the theme, with an eye on tying everything to the progress of the Blood War, rather than the goal of most of the sources, which is to make the multiverse seem approachable to adventurers. We'll be considering Barbatsu and the Abyssal Princes and the River Styx not as obstacles for adventurers to overcome, but as elements which play into this eternal conflict. This first volume will be an overview of the most commonly encountered demon and devil species, which are those found in the D&D 5th edition system reference document. This means that we will not be covering all of the fiends found in the 5th edition monster manual in this set. This will have effects on the encyclopedia's interpretation of the war and tactics. That is okay. What I hope for the encyclopedia is to build a secure base of knowledge which we can then expand. This will also allow the encyclopedia to be more accessible to those who may not encounter the more obscure and bizarre beings that play roles in the war. There is one change that I'll make to the demons and devils that are covered in Volume 1. I will be including the succubus/incubus as a demon, the way that they were classified in 1st, 2nd, and 3rd editions. Why? Well, this leads directly into my next point, how we will be looking at the sources. After all, any scholar of the multiverse can tell you that there are a multitude of sources out there to choose from, both those endorsed by the Wizards of the Coast and their predecessor, the mysterious cult called TSR, and those put forth by others. For the moment, we will be limiting ourselves to the officially endorsed publications. Of these, we will be prioritizing sources from the 2nd edition for lore and from the 3rd edition for statistics. The 2nd edition materials have the most expansive information that has ever been printed about the Blood War. In subsequent editions, the Blood War becomes little more than a footnote. Despite the fact that it's always cited, it is treated as if it's not important. I believe this is because adventurers generally find the Blood War much too dangerous to deal with more than a little bit, so scholars began to neglect information about it. However, as the 2nd edition materials make clear, the Blood War is a driving engine of the universe. Despite the fact that later editions talk less about it, they all affirm that this is still true. Given all that, we should assume that information from the second edition remains relevant unless it is clearly and logically superseded by a later edition. The logically part is important, because if there are any discrepancies, we should assume that a later and less experienced scholar has made a mistake unless they can prove their case. The scholars who contributed to 3rd edition documents were the most granular and measurement-focused of any, and that is one reason that this edition is favored for statistics. Another is that the 3rd edition properly understands that not every creature in the multiverse can be faced off against by a typical adventurer. This is the major flaw of 5th edition texts when trying to make them fit with the Blood War. The war is a conflict which shakes the foundations of reality throughout the multiverse, but 5th edition statistics are focused on making the creatures who fight in it digestible for mortals. The lack of an epic dimension, the limitation of exceptional advantage, the minimization of fiendish abilities, and more all make 5th edition a poor choice for finding out the true lore of the Blood War. That said, 5th edition materials will still be referenced from time to time. 1st edition materials have almost completely been superseded by 2nd edition, which matches 1st edition closely but gives much more detail, but they will also be consulted in research. It's 4th edition which presents a particular problem. For the most part, these materials will not be consulted in constructing the encyclopedia. The details of 4th edition are so radically different from those before and after that it isn't easy to match its information with the other sources. Making sense of 4th edition and how its information interacts with the Blood War requires its own study, one which is not very urgent for us at the moment. And that is most of what I needed to say here in setting up the rest of this first volume of the encyclopedia. In addition to the basic accounts where I'm reviewing a specific topic in the sources, I will also be making some speculations episodes about topics which are not as cut and dry as the creatures, for instance. Many of these speculations will be influencing the accounts, like the one about the power imbalance between demons and devils from the first account, but I won't be going too in-depth until I give them their own special focus. When more information has been laid out from the sources, I'll be doing larger accounts about more complex subjects in the Blood War as well. And a final note here, I will often use the phrase true world in these accounts. By true world, I mean the reality that you, the listener, know of as a human on Earth. This is necessary for certain comparisons to be made. Hopefully this is self-evident, but I wanted to make sure I defined it clearly. That is about all I have for this account. My goal here was just to set the table for the rest of these accounts, so that if you're wondering why I maybe ignored some information for this or that source, you'll have some idea of why. That said, if you have any questions, always feel free to ask. If it's a question that I can answer and that I feel I haven't already answered in the accounts, I'll tell you what I know. In addition to this script, I wanted to take the opportunity to correct my pronunciations from the first account. I really wanted to get that episode out, and so I rushed too fast to lock down correct pronunciations. Now I want to take the time to give out the pronunciations I'm going to favor going forward. Obviously, you can pronounce these any way you'd like, but I'm going to give an approximation of the pronunciations in the sources. I primarily use the article A Pronunciation Guide from Dragon Issue 93 and the 2nd edition Monstrous Compendium Outer Planes Appendix to get these pronunciations. Like I said, some modifications have been made. For instance, the Outer Planes Appendix says Barbatsu is pronounced Barbatsu, but I see no reason that the S shouldn't be a Z to get Barbatzu. After all, this is how it's spelled. Let's start with the names of the races here. The major race of devils are the Beatizu. The major race of demons are the Tanari. Now I'll go over the demons and devils I listed in the first account in the same order. Baylor, Dretch, Glabritsu, Hetzro, Marilith, Nalfeshni, though you may also hear Nalfeshne, Quasit, succubus, vrock, barbatsu, Erinyes, Gelugon, Hamatula. Now, here I do want to take a moment to note that what I've found seems to show strongly that this should be Hamatula, but I find this awkward to pronounce, so I'm sticking with Hamatula. Imp, chiton, lemur, malebranche, oceloth, pit fiend. If you've got this far, I appreciate you taking the time to listen. I am John Wooka, and this has been the Encyclopedia of the Blood War. Thanks.